Welcome to the Drawing Room Detectives, where mystery meets imagination, and every case invites you to think just a little deeper. In the heart of London's high society, a haunting melody becomes the key to murder. When a gifted musician dies mid-performance, only Sherlock Holmes can decipher the silent notes of a deadly conspiracy. Before the story begins, tell us, where in the world are you listening from? Drop it in the comments below and let the mystery unite us across time and place. Chapter 1. An Invitation to Music and Murder. It was on a dreary March afternoon, one of those days when the London fog seems to seep not only into the streets but into the very bones, that I found myself once again by the fire of our Baker Street lodgings. Holmes, in one of his more meditative moods, was lounging on the settee with his eyes half closed and fingers steepled beneath his chin, entirely still save for the occasional flicker of his brows, his mind no doubt traversing some labyrinth of deduction. We had not had a case in some days, and while Holmes found solace in the silence, I must confess to a restlessness that bordered on irritation. I was just about to suggest a walk when Mrs. Hudson entered with a silver tray and a crisply folded envelope. "A message by hand, sir. No return address." Holmes gestured lazily in my direction. "Do be so good, Watson." I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy cream paper. The handwriting was elegant and fluid, with the unmistakable air of aristocratic confidence. "Dr. Watson, Lady Agatha Hexton cordially invites you to an evening of dining and music at her residence in Belgravia, Thursday next, at 7:30. A special performance by Miss Evelyn March on the Glass Harmonium shall be the centrepiece of the evening. Your presence is most welcome. Should Mr. Holmes accompany you, the lady would be honoured." I handed the letter over to Holmes, who read it without a flicker of emotion, then leaned back with a faint hum. "Lady Hexton," he murmured. "The name is familiar." Society hostess, patron of obscure arts, wealthy widow of Lord Benjamin Hexton, who died a few years ago in circumstances never quite settled. Holmes's eyes glinted faintly. "Ah, yes, that little business of the sudden seizure. Arsenic was whispered but never confirmed." "Surely you don't believe—" "I believe," said Holmes, rising slowly, "that when a woman whose past is painted in suggestion invites a consulting detective to a musical evening, the notes may ring with more than melody." We arrived at Hexton House just as the gas lamps along Belgravia's wide streets flickered into life. The house itself loomed elegant and austere, with towering windows and ivy curling over stone like fingers that refused to release their hold. Inside, everything sparkled: cut glass chandeliers, polished wood, and laughter that tinkled like crystal. The drawing-room was filled with a refined gathering of London's upper crust, minor royals, artists of name, politicians with toothy smiles. Holmes was eyed with curiosity. I was received with warmth. Our hostess, Lady Agatha Hexton, swept toward us in a gown of deep violet and jet beading, a smile curving her rouged lips. "Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes, you honour my humble gathering." Holmes inclined his head. "The pleasure is ours, Lady Hexton. I understand we are to be treated to a rare instrument." "Indeed, the glass harmonium. A marvel, is it not? It is said even Mozart found its tones unearthly." Her eyes glittered with something unreadable. "Miss Evelyn March shall perform shortly. She has an affinity for the strange." The music room was unlike any I'd ever seen. Walls of deep green velvet, golden sconces, and in the centre a strange device that looked as if it belonged in a dream or a madhouse. The harmonium gleamed under the soft lights, its array of rotating glass bowls glistening like spun ice. A faint, almost humid chill hung in the air. Miss Evelyn March was introduced with the kind of murmurs reserved for living myth. She was pale, with hair the colour of moonlight, and a gaze that seemed too knowing for her youth. She took her seat at the instrument without a word, her fingers poised with almost reverent delicacy. Then the music began. It was not music, as one normally understands it, not a melody one could hum or repeat, but rather a series of trembling tones that seemed to echo inside one's skull. I felt my pulse stutter, and around the room I noticed guests exchanging uneasy glances, as if they too felt something shifting under their skin. And then, suddenly Miss March faltered. Her hands jerked. Her eyes went wide. A sharp, wet gasp escaped her lips. She stood, stumbled a step forward, then collapsed with a terrible, high-pitched wheeze. Foam bubbled at her mouth. Several guests cried out. Lady Hexton's face went blank. I rushed forward, but I was too late. Miss Evelyn March was dead. And on the air, still trembling like a ghost left behind, was the final note of the Glass Harmonium. Chapter 2. The Haunting Note. The room erupted into chaos. Several women screamed. A portly gentleman in a white waistcoat dropped his glass, sending champagne splashing across the marble floor. I knelt beside Miss March, already fearing the worst. Her limbs had gone slack, and her eyes, once full of eerie intensity, stared sightlessly at the coffered ceiling. There was no pulse, no breath. Death had come swiftly and cruelly. Lady Hexton stood rooted to the floor, her lips parted as if she meant to speak but had lost the will. Holmes, meanwhile, moved with a quiet certainty, not to the body, but to the instrument. He circled the harmonium slowly, crouching beside it, examining its keys, the spinning glass bowls, the metal frame, and the pads touched by Miss March's fingers. His expression was unreadable, his hands gloved and careful. I looked up from the still form on the rug. She must have had a seizure or heart failure, possibly an allergic reaction. "She had no history of fits," said Lady Hexton, her voice low and distant, as if spoken from behind a curtain. "She was in perfect health this morning." Holmes straightened and turned to me. "Watson, her last words." "She said something, I think it resonated." Holmes's brow furrowed. "Curious." The police arrived within the hour, summoned discreetly through a back corridor. Inspector Lestrade, ever the hound on society's trail, appeared with a look of grim satisfaction at being involved in a scandal of such rarefied air. Holmes wasted no time. "Lestrade, have the room secured. No one enters or leaves. I want that harmonium examined for residues, and I need access to Miss March's gloves if she wore any. Watson, note the pupils, lips, and fingernails." "She's cyanotic," I confirmed, gently opening her mouth. "Foaming at the lips, and there's a strange odour, sharp, bitter. Almonds?" Holmes nodded, but not cyanide. Too quick, too clean. This was subtle, deliberate. The instrument was her killer. Lestrade scoffed. "Come now, Holmes, a piano, murder by music?" Holmes didn't even look up. "Glass, Inspector, not ivory. And music does not only entertain, it can move, disturb, even harm. Have you ever heard of sonic resonance?" "I'm not here for ghost stories." "Neither am I." But she was not poisoned in the traditional sense. No drink, no food, and no injection mark that Watson has seen. That leaves environmental or contact exposure. He stepped closer to the instrument, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes narrowed. "Imagine, Lestrade," he said softly, "a substance that clings invisibly to glass, only released through vibration, activated by a specific frequency. A fatal note, if you will." I shivered. "That's speculation, Holmes." "Most murders begin as speculation. The trick is proving which are plausible." We remained at Hexton House late into the night. The dinner guests had long since been ushered out, and the body removed. The harmonium, however, remained untouched under Holmes's orders, guarded like a crime scene altar. Lady Hexton, had retreated to her room after providing a list of guests, servants, and details about Miss March's time under her patronage. Holmes seemed particularly interested in her mention that Miss March had only recently returned from Vienna, where she had studied with an eccentric composer known for his obsession with dissonance and altered tuning systems. She believed, Lady Hexton had said, that music could alter the mind, shape reality. She once told me certain notes made her feel as though the air itself was moving differently, mad perhaps, but brilliant. That night, as Holmes smoked contemplatively by the window of our guest room, I asked what troubled him. "It's not just how she died," he said. "It's why. Evelyn March wasn't simply an unfortunate musician. She was a messenger. That piece she played, modified, I suspect, was her warning." "Warning of what?" "That," Holmes murmured, "is what we shall now discover." Chapter 3. The Instrument of Death. Morning in Belgravia dawned grey and unsettled, the kind of chill that clings to old stone and older secrets. I awoke to the muted rustle of papers and the sharp scent of Turkish tobacco. Holmes was already dressed, seated at the small writing desk in our guest room, poring over a series of notes he'd made in the margins of Lady Hexton's guest registry. "Up at last, Watson. Good. I'll need your steady hands today." "For what?" I asked, stifling a yawn. "Surely you're not planning to dissect the harmonium?" Holmes glanced up, his eyes bright with a peculiar tension. "Not quite. But if I'm correct, we're dealing with a device far more complex than mere keys and strings. That instrument is no longer a musical curiosity. It is a murder weapon." He stood and strode toward the door. "Come, Lestrade awaits us downstairs, and I believe the key to the mystery lies not in the performer, but in the notes themselves." We returned to the music room, now cold and silent. The glass harmonium sat beneath a velvet dust cloth, draped like a casket. 2 constables stood guard, one of whom had the pallor of someone who'd spent the night imagining ghosts in the dark. Holmes removed the cloth with a slow, almost ceremonial motion. The harmonium gleamed like crystal in the morning light, its glass bowls arranged on a spindle, each a different size and shape. Thin felt pads remained where Miss March's fingers had pressed. "I've studied these instruments before," Holmes said, bending close. "The vibration is produced by friction against moistened fingers, but what if someone coated the rims thinly, invisibly, with a substance that reacted only when vibrated at a precise frequency?" "A contact toxin?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded. "Exactly. Not ingested, not inhaled, transferred through touch, absorbed through the skin, then triggered by the very act of playing." He pointed to a faint smudge on the largest bowl. "Observe, a crystalline residue, barely visible to the naked eye." I examined it through my pocket magnifier. "It's there, but I can't identify it." "You won't," said Holmes. "It's no known compound in our London apothecaries. I've taken the liberty of sending a scrap to Stamford at St. Bart's. He has a keen eye for obscure toxins." Lestrade arrived then, his expression a mixture of scepticism and irritation. "Well, Holmes, you've poked and sniffed at that wretched thing for hours. What does it tell you?" Holmes rose, brushing glass dust from his hands. That this was no accident. Miss March was meant to die during the performance, and not just at any moment, during a specific passage, which means the composition was tampered with. Someone altered the sheet music. Lady Hexton, who had been silently observing from the doorway, spoke at last. The piece was an original, composed by Julian Crowthorne. Evelyn brought it with her from Vienna. Holmes turned to her. "Do you still have the score?" She hesitated. "I believe it is still on the stand." Holmes moved swiftly to the instrument and removed the sheet. His eyes scanned the notations with the efficiency of a trained decipherer. Crowthorne's signature style, he said, but here, these bars, modulated into a frequency range few composers would dare approach, repeating harmonic intervals that create dissonant oscillations, meant to disturb, to unsettle. He tapped the final passage. And here, the high F, repeated 3 times in succession. Likely where the reaction occurred. You think the music itself activated the poison? Lestrade asked. Holmes turned toward him. I think the music was the delivery system, and whoever tampered with this piece understood exactly how to weaponize it. He looked at Lady Hexton. Tell me, did Miss March speak of anyone else reviewing or modifying the score before her performance? Lady Hexton's face twitched, only slightly. She mentioned that Crowthorne sent her the original, but she may have made some changes herself. Holmes arched an eyebrow. She altered her own death? Perhaps not knowingly, Lady Hexton said, her voice low. Or perhaps she knew something we did not. Holmes was quiet a moment. Then I shall need to speak with Mr. Crowthorne, immediately. That afternoon a telegram was dispatched to Vienna, but as luck or fate would have it, we soon learned that Julian Crowthorne had recently arrived in London and was staying not far from Belgravia, in a rented suite above a small concert hall in Kensington. Holmes turned to me as he pulled on his gloves. A dead woman plays a death song composed by a secretive genius on an instrument that vibrates poison through air and touch. Tell me, Watson, do you not hear the music of murder? Chapter 4. The House of Echoes. Kensington, in contrast to the grandeur of Belgravia, presented a quieter face of London, bookshops tucked into corners, rows of high-windowed flats, and an air of aged gentility. It was here, above a modest concert salon tucked between a tea-room and a tailor, that we found the man Holmes referred to as our composer of death. Julian Crowthorne opened the door himself. He was a man in his late 40s, with the pallor of someone who had lived too long in the company of candlelight and sad music. His hair was greying at the temples, and his clothes were elegant but worn. He looked first at Holmes, then at me, and then past us, as if searching for something or someone who wasn't there. Mr. Holmes, he said, without surprise, I knew you would come. Holmes inclined his head slightly. Then I hope you also know why. Crowthorne turned away, waving us in. The flat was small but meticulously ordered, a baby grand piano in one corner, shelves of musical scores, and a writing desk covered in ink stains and scratched-out staves. On the wall hung framed portraits of composers and an oil painting of a woman with pale hair and melancholy eyes. Evelyn March. She was my pupil, he said, catching my glance. And once, much more. You composed the piece she played at Lady Hexton's dinner, Holmes said, without ceremony. Did you alter it before she performed? Crowthorne shook his head. No, I sent her the score months ago, a piece I called Vibratio Mortalis, purely theoretical, based on studies of subharmonics and the influence of musical intervals on neural pathways. It was never meant to be performed. Holmes narrowed his eyes. You sent her a composition you believed could harm someone? It was meant as a warning, Crowthorne said, slumping into a chair. A lesson in restraint. I didn't think she'd ever actually play it in public. But Evelyn was, how can I explain it, drawn to the edge of things. Her ability to hear tones others could not. It made her restless, curious. And yet she died, I said, only moments after playing it. Crowthorne's face twisted. Then someone must have changed the piece. It was dangerous in theory, but not lethal. Holmes held out the original score. Is this your handwriting throughout? Crowthorne studied it for a moment. Then, grimly, he pointed to the lower margin of the final page. No, That's not mine. She or someone modified the coda. It raises the resonant frequency enough to turn theory into effect. Whoever added these final bars knew what they were doing. Holmes turned to me with a flicker of triumph. You see, Watson, the instrument was the conduit, but the composition was the trigger. Someone weaponized Crowthorne's theory. Crowthorne stood suddenly. Evelyn wrote to me last week. She said she had discovered something unsettling about Lady Hexton, that she was going to expose her in some way, but the letter was vague, deliberately so. Holmes's expression sharpened. Then this was no tragic accident. It was silencing masked by art. We returned to Hexton House that evening, under the dim cloak of dusk. Holmes's mood was electric, his movements brisk. He paced the grand hallway like a bloodhound. Lady Hexton told us Evelyn brought the composition from Vienna, he muttered, more to himself than to me. But now we know she was still corresponding with Crowthorne. Why lie about the source of the music? We passed the parlour, where a harpsichord sat unused beneath a lace cover. Holmes paused and ran his fingers across the lid. She feared something. Perhaps Evelyn knew too much. I glanced up at the second floor. Or perhaps someone upstairs feared her. That night the household was hushed, the air tense. Servants passed in and out of rooms without speaking. A chambermaid named Ada whispered to Holmes as we passed the servants' stair. I shouldn't say this, sir," she said, eyes wide. "But Miss March, she was frightened near the end. Said there were sounds in her room at night, tones, vibrations, said the harmonium wasn't resting." "She meant the instrument was playing itself?" I asked, incredulous. Ada nodded. "Just little notes, not full songs, but they'd come at night, as if someone or something was testing it." Holmes thanked her and turned to me. "Not madness, Watson. Testing. Someone needed to fine-tune the harmonium to deliver the poison. Evelyn must have heard it and suspected." He glanced up the staircase. "We'll search her room, now." Miss March's quarters were modest, tucked at the rear of the upper floor. Her bed was neatly made, her few possessions arranged with care. On the writing desk sat a half-burned letter. Holmes read it aloud in a murmur. "The melody keeps changing. I no longer trust the silence in this house. She smiles too much when I talk of Vienna. If anything happens, look beneath the notes." Holmes lifted a corner of the writing blotter and found a folded envelope. Inside, a single sheet of music paper, notated by hand, but not with standard keys. The symbols were strange, esoteric, marked with triangles and dots, like a code layered over music. Holmes's voice was barely audible. "Ciphered notes. Evelyn hid something here." And with that, he turned to me, his eyes cold and clear. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Upper Rooms. Though the house was still and dim by the time we descended from Evelyn March's room, Holmes's mind was racing. He carried the ciphered music sheet like it was a burning ember, refusing to let it out of his sight. "Watson," he said in a clipped whisper, "we are past theories. This is the final stanza of a symphony of guilt. We must find the conductor." We returned to the study, where Holmes spread the coded sheet across a desk and began aligning it with the known composition Miss March had performed. I recognized some of the symbols from earlier ciphers Holmes had cracked. Musical notation used as code, each altered note correlating to a letter. "She was documenting something," he said. "These markings, see? Placed atop only certain measures, she chose specific tones to hide a message." He worked in silence for several minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, slowly, the message revealed itself. "Lady H orchestrated LH's death. Hidden poison, glass, tuned to kill. I altered the final piece. If I die, she feared my silence more than my words. I felt a chill creep down my spine. L.H.? I asked. Her husband? Holmes nodded grimly. Lord Hexton, the rumours were true, Watson. Evelyn must have discovered that he didn't die of natural causes, that Lady Hexton poisoned him and used the glass harmonium once before, and now she has done it again. Just then, a faint knock at the door startled us. It was Ada, the maid, looking even paler than before. There's something else, sir, she said, twisting her hands. I didn't want to say it in front of the others. Holmes gestured for her to come in. I found this in the servants' wing, on the floor beneath the laundry chute. I think someone tried to hide it. She handed Holmes a folded sheet of music paper, torn at one edge and smudged with soot. Holmes unfolded it and let out a quiet breath. It's the original ending of the composition, the one Crowthorne wrote. See here, no repetition of the high F, no lethal intervals. He turned to me. Which means someone removed this sheet and replaced it with the altered one Evelyn performed. Ada cleared her throat, hesitating. And I saw something else. 2 nights before the dinner, I passed the music room on my way to the cellar. I heard the harmonium being played. Just a few notes. When I looked in, Lady Hexton was sitting at it, wearing gloves. Holmes's expression did not change, but I recognized that peculiar stillness, like the moment before a trap springs shut. Thank you, Ada, he said. You've been more helpful than you know. Later that evening, Holmes and I sat in the grand salon, the glass harmonium looming silent and cold before us. Lady Hexton entered precisely on the hour, dressed in mourning black with a silver brooch pinned at her throat. Mr. Holmes, she said with a faint smile, I trust your investigations have yielded some clarity. He rose from his chair. Indeed, Lady Hexton, I believe Miss March's death was no accident, and I believe you know why. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. That's a dangerous accusation. No more dangerous, Holmes replied, than lacing a harmonium with a resonant contact toxin derived from Himalayan botanicals, triggered by modified frequencies, specifically written into the final bars of a musical piece you insisted be played at your dinner party. Silence fell. You were the last person with access to the sheet music. You dismissed your servants early, and you, Lady Hexton, were seen playing the harmonium days before the performance, testing it. You have no proof, she said. Holmes stepped aside. On the contrary, Miss March left us her voice, encoded but clear. She named you in a cipher written over the very music you tried to use against her. And we've recovered the original, unaltered ending that you discarded down the laundry chute. Lady Hexton didn't move, not even a tremor in her jaw. Then she turned to the harmonium and gently touched the rim of one of the glass bowls. Her gloved fingers made no sound. I did what was necessary, she whispered. My husband was cruel. Evelyn was clever, but she wasn't loyal. She threatened to bring it all down. She turned to face us. Would you destroy a house to punish a single termite? Holmes's face was unreadable. Your metaphors won't help you now. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Lestrade entered with 2 officers close behind. Lady Hexton stood with the quiet dignity of the condemned. As she was led away, her hand passed near the harmonium one last time. The glass shivered faintly. Chapter 6. A Poison Like No Other. The following morning, back at Baker Street, I found Holmes already dressed and hunched over the chemistry bench he kept near the window. The coded message and both versions of the music score lay spread beside a pair of stained gloves, a folded telegram, and 3 shallow dishes of glass shards taken from the harmonium. The air smelled faintly of something sharp, almost metallic. He didn't look up as I entered. "Stamford has confirmed my suspicions," he said quietly. "The residue on the harmonium bowls contains the traces of a neurotoxin virtually unknown in Europe. It originates from the crushed seeds of the chopal vine, native to the eastern Himalayas. A rare and bitter poison, slow-acting unless activated." I took a seat opposite him. "Activated? You mean—" "Vibrations, Watson. The molecular bonds within the compound are destabilized by high-frequency resonance. Played in the correct sequence, at a particular pressure, it becomes volatile. The harmonium wasn't merely an instrument, it was the trigger." I blinked. "And Evelyn? She altered the ending to protect herself? Or—" "No," Holmes said. "That's the most tragic part of all. Evelyn did alter the piece, but not to protect herself. She believed she was exposing Lady Hexton by weaving in the resonant pattern that matched the music heard during Lord Hexton's death, an echo of the murder she'd uncovered. But she did not know Lady Hexton had already tainted the instrument." He paused, then added more softly, "She believed she was unveiling a crime, not walking straight into one." There was a moment of silence between us as I absorbed the terrible irony. Holmes continued, pacing now. "What's more, Lady Hexton never intended to use this method again." Evelyn forced her hand. When she realized Evelyn had deciphered her past, she knew only the same music that protected her before could silence the threat. That meant another death, another accident, delivered in the same haunting way. But why use such a strange method in the first place? Holmes turned to me, his voice low. Because it offered plausible deniability. What better murder than one no one can explain? A performer dies mid-performance, no wound, no trace. The audience hears nothing more than a strange melody. Unless one understands sound as a weapon, the harmonium remains a mere curiosity. He returned to the bench, lifting one of the shards. "See here, this groove along the rim. Microscopic scoring. That's where the poison settled. I believe she applied it with a soft cloth laced in resin. Invisible. Odorless. Safe until played." I exhaled slowly. "And it stayed dormant all that time?" "Only until Evelyn struck the final notes. Just then a knock came at the door. It was Lestrade, hat in hand and eyes weary. He stepped inside as if the air of Baker Street might offer more clarity than the fogged halls of Scotland Yard. "She confessed, you know," he said. "Lady Hexton, to both deaths, the husband and the girl. Said Evelyn was the first person who ever made her afraid." Holmes nodded, unsurprised. "Because Evelyn saw beneath the velvet and mirrors, and because she didn't flinch from the truth." Lestrade handed Holmes a folded sheet. "From Crowthorne. He's returned to Vienna. Asked us to forward this to you." Holmes unfolded the note and read aloud. Evelyn had a gift, not for performance, but for listening, to the parts of music most of us ignore. She knew there was something terrible woven into that piece. I wish I had never written it, but perhaps now it can rest in silence. Holmes folded the paper with care and slipped it into his coat pocket. "I think," he said, "it already has." That night I dreamt of the harmonium. Not the image of it, but the sound, a single glass note trembling on the air, its tone stretching into silence, like a string pulled too far. There was something deeply wrong in it, something that didn't belong in this world. When I awoke, Holmes was already lighting his pipe by the fire. "You heard it too," he said without looking up. I nodded, and neither of us ever spoke of it again. Chapter 7. The Composer's Lament. We received a second letter from Julian Crowthorne 2 days after Lady Hexton's arrest. It was longer than the first, written in a hasty but elegant hand, and enclosed not only a letter but a small parcel, an aged sketch of Evelyn March seated at the harmonium, her eyes focused, her hands poised above the glass bowls like a conjurer casting a spell. Holmes read the letter aloud over breakfast, his voice unusually subdued. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, it is done then. The ghost beneath the music is finally silent. I'm not sure whether to feel relief or guilt. I created the piece, yes, but not the intent. That was hers, not mine. Still, I gave Evelyn the map, and she followed it into the dark. You asked me once why she would play such a dangerous composition. The answer is this. Evelyn believed that sound could reveal the truth in ways words never could. She said music could vibrate lies into dust. She wanted the world to hear what she had learned, wanted Lady Hexton to feel the same terror she had imposed upon others. She altered the composition only slightly, just enough to echo the original melody Lady Hexton played the night her husband died. Evelyn believed someone would remember. She gambled on memory as her justice. I believe she succeeded, but the cost was her life. I have returned to Vienna where the snow seems to bury the past. I will never compose again, but I will remember her, not as a victim nor a martyr, but as the only musician who truly listened." Holmes let the letter fall gently onto the table. "A romantic's farewell," he said, "but not an untrue one. I studied the sketch of Evelyn March, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Later that afternoon, Holmes and I visited the London Conservatory of the Arts, where Evelyn had once studied under Crowthorne's tutelage. Her former instructor, a brittle old man with white tufts of hair and a voice like dry paper, led us to the practice room she had favoured. "She used to stay long after the others had left," he said, "sometimes hours after dark, not to rehearse, but to listen, to the decay of sound in the room. She said the space whispered if you gave it time." Holmes ran a finger along the piano keys, then tapped the wall lightly. "A musician with the instincts of a sleuth," he murmured. "Yes," the man said, "but not built for our world. She had too much feeling and not enough armor." We stepped into the corridor, where a young student was playing something light and lilting on a violin. It floated down the hall, innocent and bright, a striking contrast to the brooding melody I still remembered from the harmonium. Holmes paused and listened, head tilted. "That," he said at last, "is music meant to forget." That night I found him by the fire again, pipe in hand, gaze distant. "You believe Evelyn meant to die, don't you?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. "I believe she hoped to survive, but prepared to perish. That is the difference between the brave and the reckless." He tapped the end of his pipe against the ashtray. "She knew the harmonium had already been touched. She must have suspected it. But the truth mattered more, even if it came at the price of her life." I looked toward the window, where rain whispered against the glass. "A haunting death," I said. Holmes gave a wan smile. And yet, in her final performance, she exposed a killer. He turned back to the fire. "Sometimes, Watson, justice arrives not in courtroom, but in chords." Chapter 8. Discord among the elite. Although Lady Hexton was safely under lock and key, Holmes was not yet finished. "You see, Watson," he said that morning over a plain breakfast of toast and tea, "murder rarely exists in a vacuum. There are always ripples, false friends, silent witnesses, hidden debts. The dinner party was not only a stage, it was an audience." He retrieved Lady Hexton's guest list from a drawer, his finger tracing each name with surgical precision. 4 of these names were also present at Lord Hexton's final supper. Why host them again Why expose herself to familiar eyes? I studied the list. You think one of them saw something the first time? Or did something? Holmes rose. We shall call on the Earl of Carewood this afternoon. He was a close friend of the Hextons and a patron of Miss March's recitals. I find his silence during this affair deafening. The Earl's townhouse in Mayfair was opulent, almost suffocating in its richness, Persian carpets, velvet drapes, and gilt-framed oil portraits of ancestors long since buried. Lord Carewood himself met us in the library, a glass of brandy already in hand, despite the early hour. He was a man past his prime, but clinging stubbornly to its trappings, dyed hair, overly polished boots, and a smile that felt more like a habit than a choice. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I suppose you've come about Agatha's little scandal." Holmes did not sit. "We've come about the death of Miss Evelyn March, and perhaps your memory of another death 5 years prior." Carewood sipped his brandy slowly. "The old rumours about poor Ben? Absurd even then. He was a fragile man, always had trouble with his nerves." Holmes tilted his head. "And yet you testified at the inquest that he seemed in robust spirits the very night he died." Carewood waved dismissively. A figure of speech. Holmes stepped closer. "Lord Carewood, I have in my possession Miss March's final cipher, naming Lady Hexton as her murderer. She believed her music would expose not only the method, but the pattern, that her death would force others to speak." For the first time, the Earl's smile slipped. "She also believed," Holmes continued, "that someone at the table would understand, someone who had heard the same melody before, under equally tragic circumstances." Carewood turned away and stared into the fireplace. "What do you want, Holmes?" "The truth." There was a long pause. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I remember the sound. The night Ben Hexton died. I thought it was nothing, some eerie aria on that infernal instrument. But it never left my head. When Evelyn played it again, something in me cracked. It was like hearing a ghost." Holmes stepped back. "Then why not speak up?" The Earl's face tightened. "Because we all knew, those of us close to Agatha. We knew she'd done it, but no one dared say so. Her wealth, her influence, no one wanted to be the one to challenge her." "And Evelyn?" I asked. "She was young, bold. She thought truth was enough. But in that house," he said bitterly, "truth was just another thing polished for display and locked away." Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. "Thank you for your honesty at last." As we walked down the grand staircase, I whispered, "Do you believe him?" Holmes shrugged. "I believe he remembered the music. Whether that memory haunts him or comforts him, I leave to his conscience." Over the following week, the scandal exploded in quiet rooms and whispered columns. Lady Hexton's arrest sent ripples through society's upper crust, not because of the deaths. Society has always weathered those, but because of the method. The idea that art itself could be a weapon, it disturbed even the most jaded minds. The Glass Harmonium was removed from Hexton House under heavy guard, taken to the British Museum for study, and eventually secure storage. Yet I noticed Holmes never once mentioned its final destination. One evening, as we walked along the Thames, I asked him if he believed the instrument might still pose a danger. Holmes smiled faintly. "No more than a sword once sheathed, but it is better the blade be buried where no hand may reach it again." He paused. "Besides," he added, "music, like memory, lingers long after its source has gone quiet." Chapter 9. Unmasking the Matron. The trial of Lady Agatha Hexton loomed in the near distance like a thundercloud, its outcome uncertain, but its spectacle assured. Holmes, ever one to avoid courtrooms unless summoned, had withdrawn from the swirl of public curiosity and returned to quieter contemplations. And yet there remained unfinished notes in this melody of murder. "Something still troubles me, Watson," he said one morning, poring over Evelyn March's ciphered page again. "She wrote, she feared my silence more than my words. Most curious, what silence could frighten a woman like Lady Hexton?" "She meant blackmail," I suggested. "Or perhaps exposure." Holmes shook his head. "No, Evelyn was not the blackmailing sort, but she may have held something so damning that silence about it made her dangerous." He rose and paced the floor. "Consider, Lady Hexton committed murder once, and perhaps could have moved on. But she didn't. She orchestrated a second, more complex crime. Why escalate? Unless the first act of violence was incomplete, unless it concealed another, more shameful truth." I frowned. What could be worse than murdering her husband and protégé? Holmes gave me a look I had seen only a few times in our years together, one laced with pity and a touch of disgust. "Control, Watson. She was not merely silencing Evelyn, she was reclaiming control over something or someone." That afternoon, we returned once more to Hexton House. The police had concluded their search, and the great home now stood cold and unoccupied, awaiting sale or seizure. Holmes moved through it not as a visitor but as a surgeon returning to the theatre. He stopped before the door to Lady Hexton's private parlour, the only room we had not thoroughly examined. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with floral perfume. Portraits of the late Lord Hexton glared down from the walls in an almost theatrical arrangement. On the desk lay a silver jewellery box, the contents emptied except for one item, a locket. Holmes opened it. Inside, a miniature painting, not of Lord Hexton, but of a young woman. Pale, elegant, and unmistakably Evelyn March. He showed it to me silently. Then he opened the desk drawers, searching until he found a stack of personal correspondence. Holmes sorted them quickly, his fingers skimming each envelope with surgical efficiency. Then he paused. "What have you found?" I asked. "A letter, torn and never sent." The paper was fragile, the ink blotched by what may have been tears or spilled perfume. The handwriting was Lady Hexton's. Holmes nodded, his voice low. Evelyn was more than a protégée. She was Lady Hexton's ward, perhaps even her daughter, adopted quietly to preserve social reputation. Their relationship was tangled, half maternal, half possessive. He tapped the locket. "That is not the gaze of a patron. It's the obsession of someone who could not abide rejection." I felt a tightening in my chest. Then Evelyn's silence was her departure. "Exactly," said Holmes. "Evelyn planned to leave the country, to perform in America. She never told Lady Hexton, but the older woman sensed it. And in that moment, the harmonium became a coffin disguised as a farewell." He replaced the locket gently. Lady Hexton didn't fear what Evelyn would say. She feared what Evelyn would become without her. The court proceedings moved swiftly once these letters were submitted into evidence. The picture that emerged was not merely of murder, but of control, of a matron who fashioned lives around her like marionettes and turned to poison when the strings frayed. The press, ever eager, dubbed her the Glass Widow. Holmes refused all interviews. "She was not brilliant," he said to me over supper. "She was terrified, and fear breeds cunning more efficiently than intellect." He took a sip of wine. "This case was never about music, Watson. It was about dissonance, between love and possession, between truth and silence. And in the end, Evelyn struck the final chord." I asked him, some weeks later, whether he would ever listen to a glass harmonium again. Holmes only said, "There are instruments that should be heard only once." Chapter 10, A Melody in Silence. The final notes of the case unravelled not in a courtroom, nor beneath the weight of headlines, but in a modest churchyard outside of Bath. Evelyn March was buried on a quiet, overcast morning, far from the salons and salons that once echoed with her music. Only a handful of mourners were present, Julian Crowthorne among them, and ourselves. There was no performance, no eulogy of grandeur. Just the wind brushing through the trees and a low hymn played on a simple violin by a conservatory student, his hands trembling as he tried to summon a melody worthy of her memory. Holmes stood silently throughout the service, gloved hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the soil. He did not speak until the final clod of earth was scattered over her resting place. "She never played for applause," he said quietly. "Only for truth." Later, back at Baker Street, he opened a parcel Crowthorne had pressed into his hand before leaving the cemetery. Inside was a thin-bound score, the March Elegy, composed in Evelyn's honour. It contained no words, no dedication, only music, soft, haunting, and unfinished. Holmes placed it gently atop the others in our archive. "Let it remain that way," he said, "incomplete, like her." Weeks passed. The world moved on. Society found new scandals, and the newspapers stopped speaking of the Glass Widow. But from time to time, Holmes would take out Evelyn's ciphered score, not to decode it, but to look, to remember. One evening, as we shared a pipe near the hearth, I asked him whether he believed Evelyn had truly won in the end. Holmes took a long draw, then exhaled slowly. "She made the invisible visible. She forced the truth into sound. That is a form of justice, Watson, even if it came too late for her." I nodded. "And Lady Hexton?" "She lost everything," Holmes said. "Control, legacy, illusion. Evelyn's silence did what no accusation ever could. It unmasked the performance." He turned to me, his voice softer. "There is a melody, Watson, that plays in every lie. A subtle tension, barely heard. Evelyn heard it, and in answering with her own, she changed the tune of the world around her." We sat for a long while, saying nothing more. Outside, the wind brushed against the panes with the soft rhythm of breath and time, and inside, somewhere beneath memory and dust and fading echoes, the last note of Evelyn March lingered, unspoken, but never unheard. The notes have faded, the case has closed, but in the silence that follows, the truth still echoes. Thank you for joining us in unravelling the mystery of the Glass Harmonium, a tale of music, madness, and murder. If you love classic mysteries, chilling atmosphere, and brilliant deductions, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more cases from the Drawing Room Detectives. Until next time, goodbye, and may your curiosity always lead you to the truth.